The Joe Rogan Experience.
What do you think would be best case scenario for Native Americans in the United States? Like, I'll sort of give you the magic wand again. Like, what would be best case scenario? Because the strange thing that we have in front of us here is that there is one country, the United States, but there's not just United States North American citizens here. There's also Native Americans of various different tribes that have their own reservations. And as you said, they're sovereign and they can kind of make their own decisions. What's the magic one? Like, how do you clear up all these problems associated with the horrific treatment, everything from alcoholism to the problems with schools to self-esteem issues, all these problems in North America, while also not the Native Americans, in the way I'm looking at it, they want to stay a member of their tribe, and they don't necessarily want to be just Americans. They want to keep their heritage, right? Universally. How do those two things work together? How do we all live together in America and yet have these tribes and do it in a way that works best for everybody?
Right. Well, that's a freaking complicated ass question that you just freaking ask. Even with a magic wand, I'm not quite. But it's a process, right? And part of it is these myths that we have to correct, and that we have to find a new way to be able to tell our stories, and not rely on non-Indian authors to tell our stories, but you need to hear our stories from us. We need to be able to tell our stories and to reteach the general public about who Native Americans are, where we've been, and where we want to go.
Where do you want to go?
We've had this kind of pretend fantasy world about Indians. Pocahontas, Columbus stories, Custer. They've all been stories that have fed into the American politic in a certain way at certain periods of time. And what I want is that this is the time now where tribal nations have a lot to lose. And we're in a current administration that is trying to terminate us once again.
What are they doing differently than other administrations?
Well, they just they are taking land out of trust status. They would. There are groups that are attacking the basis of federal Indian law and the rights that we do have. So there's an act called the Indian Child Welfare Act. It was passed in 1978, and it's an act that the association was heavily involved in to get passed. And it started with some work with the Spirit Lake Sioux tribe. And a woman came to the people back then and said, they took my kids. They stole my children. And after investigation, it was found that it wasn't just happening at Spirit Lake, but it was happening all over Indian country, where state welfare workers were taking Indian children in a disproportionate rate. A quarter of all Indian children during that period of time were taken away from their own families and adopted out to white families. And so the Indian Child Welfare Act required state courts to do things before a child was taken away from its tribal nation. There are groups now that are working to dismantle that act, and
for what purpose?
And that's being supported because they think it's racist. So it's like they've taken it and are looking through
They
a
flipped it
backwards
around?
mirror. Yes.
Wow.
So instead of it being an act that was passed to protect our children and to make sure that children had ties to their culture and their families, they're saying that that's not in the best interest of children. So they're still looking at Indian tribes as we can't take care of our own kids, that our way of life is not acceptable, and other adoptive families would be better. And what's interesting is that the Indian Child Welfare Act doesn't prevent non-Indian families from adopting children. It just requires a certain process to make sure that the affiliated tribal nation is involved in that placement and adoption process, and so that the child can maintain those connections, or that they tried to find a family that's more culturally appropriate for the child. So there's just been, actually it came out of the Goldwater Institute, which is a Goldwater, when he was a senator? He actually voted for the Indian Child Welfare Act, but today the Goldwater Institute is actually funding cases around the nation to attack the Indian Child Welfare Act.
What is their reason behind it? I mean, what are they trying to achieve?
They say it's not in the best interest of Indian children. And even though there are child welfare organizations around the country that say the Indian Child Welfare Act is actually the gold standard in child welfare, and that we should be utilizing those principles that are used in the Indian Child Welfare Act to protect all children, to maintain familial connections.